Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Cyrus with Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics, and I'm reporting right now from a restaurant in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So I figured this would be a nice time to take a look at some traditional food, if food comes out while I'm making the video, and talk about a few subjects on my mind today in relation to what we talk about on this channel, which is life after death and spirituality and metaphysics. So let's take a quick look around. This is a restaurant called Mimi's Cafe. It's in downtown Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of the oldest cultures on the planet, and something that makes Ethiopia very special is the fact that it is the only African country that had never been colonized, and as a result, anthropologists suggest that this is one of the most authentic places that you can go in Africa because it has always remained sovereign in that sense for a very, very long time. This is my food. Thank you. So we have a very traditional dish at the moment that I'm about to eat. This is it's like a dried spiced beef, and it's served on the Ethiopian traditional bread. Now this is a sponge bread, and so to eat Ethiopian food, actually you break off pieces of the bread, and then you just wrap the food in the piece of the bread that you cut off. So again, this is basically the staple food in Ethiopia. It's like a sourdough, so you can see all these little pockets are formed during the fermentation process, and it creates a very spongy type of bread that is also durable and filled with vitamins and minerals. So it's kind of like a some people call it like a miracle food, like a wonder food, because it keeps the whole country healthy. And then to eat, you find the bite you want, and then you scoop it up. I probably shouldn't be eating with my left hand, but I'm holding the phone, so. And then that's, no utensils required. Although a few napkins would have been handy. The spiced beef, it's a little bit chewy. But of course, it's loaded with flavor, and I don't see how I can eat that egg without using a spoon, but we'll find out. So as I was saying, for a long time, Ethiopia was known as the Abyssinian Empire, and the empire actually continued all the way until the 1970s when a communist dictatorship took over. Now that communist dictatorship resulted in what happens a lot with communist dictatorships is massive genocide and famine and millions of people dying. This is when the famines happened in the 80s that we're so familiar with, like it's in history. A lot of people my age and older, like we equate the country with famine because of what happened. Now the good news is that the communist dictatorship was toppled, replaced by a socialist democracy, and there's still issues in the country, there's still challenges, but it's safe enough to come here, hang out, walk around. They say not to walk around at night, but I actually find the place to be pretty darn safe, and I haven't even gotten to the coffee. Ethiopia invented coffee, literally, so we can thank Ethiopia for drinking coffee. And so they take coffee very seriously here. They have coffee ceremonies and ceremonial coffee serving in restaurants like this. That's actually that stand with those traditional looking vases and jugs and coffee cups. And it's a little bit reminiscent of the Japanese tea ceremony, except it is with coffee. So if you're not a big fan of tea, if you like ceremonies, skip on Japan, come to Ethiopia, and check out the coffee ceremony. So, in this video, by the way, you are watching Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics, and I encourage you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so yet, if you like these kinds of topics, as well as the notification bell. This tells YouTube that the channel is relevant, and also helps fight back against censorship, because this channel was denied funding by YouTube. They don't like esoteric, metaphysical, spiritual types of channels. Sometimes they end up getting suppressed on the search feed. It becomes difficult to develop the channels, and so any help I can have to push back against that is always appreciated. So, in this video, I want to talk about the myopic way that we look at the topic of life after death. So, myopic means a very narrow perspective. When you go into the metaphysical field, when you go into the any kind of spiritual, supernatural genre, you will undoubtedly find people with a very specific perspective of what the quote afterlife is like. Lately, I've found myself really disagreeing with just the whole concept of an afterlife. I think, what we're looking at is the entire universe, the entire spectrum of existence, which could include countless millions, billions, trillions, an infinite number of conditions that we could end up in. Whether it's physical, solid, tangible worlds like this one, to less physical worlds, to things that are just kind of beyond our imagination or comprehension. Maybe not every civilization is confined to rocks floating in space, or biological, but maybe many other civilizations are biological. Maybe we as souls, we have the ability to decide what form we want to take, wherever it may be, anywhere, and that all of it is accessible just with a single thought, blink of an eye. That's how quick we can swap between different realms. So there's so much possibility, and yet when you go into this field, you'll find a lot of people with this very, very narrow sort of one-sided opinion that basically the quote afterlife is this condition where we float around in the light, and then that's it. We serve God, we merge with source consciousness, and then that's literally all that we do for eternity until we decide to reincarnate. And then, as I've talked about before on this channel, you'll find that this concept is heavily married to Christian theology, because it's very difficult to pin down sometimes what theologians believe and what Christian leaders truly say about quote heaven. But often when you do, it's a variation of some form of floating around in heaven, serving and worshiping God all day, which brings to mind the age-old question posed by atheists: wouldn't eternal bliss in heaven get old after a while? And I do think it's a relevant question. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that in Western culture, a lot of near-death experiences report a condition like this, floating in the light, being in bliss, and serving or worshiping or being part of God or source consciousness forever and ever. Because when you read about near-death experiences from different parts of the world, for example, India, then you'll find it's a very different experience. And in a place like India, it tends to be very bureaucratic. So instead of like just going in a tunnel and going into, quote, the light, you may find yourself in a bureaucratic type of condition where a bunch of elders and overseers determine whether or not... Oh, thank you, I really need that. Yes, I have napkins now. They read my mind. Anyway, where a bunch of elders and overseers determine, okay, this bite of spiced beef is way too chewy for me to possibly eat. It's not gonna work. Okay. Note to self, avoid the very blackened looking bits of beef. Anyway, so in Indian near-death experiences, it's a more bureaucratic process. You have a council of elders maybe deciding if you're worthy enough to continue, or if you have to go back to your body, or if you have to reincarnate. Whereas in the West, it's like, just merging back with God and floating around in the sea of light. My theory is that a lot of this is heavily influenced by Christian theology, and both the individual and collective belief systems, I believe, create these types of realms. And basically, where you die, where you go is where you're meant to be. And if that's what resonates with you, then that's the condition you may find yourself in. And But I don't think that this is an objective way of looking at the entire scope of reality. So now you may see why I disagree so much. When you hear people say things like, oh, you cannot eat, you can't eat Ethiopian food in the afterlife, it is forbidden because it's a non-physical existence. We exist as orbs floating around for all eternity. It's really good, by the way. And the reason this is clearly such a narrow way of looking at things is somebody means to tell me that in all of existence, the entire scope, the entire breadth of the multiverse, count infinite realms that we can't even begin to fathom, and the entire greater existence of places we go to far above and beyond our one brief existence here. In all of those realms, there's no sex, there's no food, there's no taste, there's no sensation. Because the people who say this, they are connected to the concept of an afterlife. So the idea that there's this other place that we go to that is separate from here and is earth-centric and part of the existence of being on Earth. And then we can either live there or we can come back and reincarnate here if we get tired of just floating around in the light forever. And a lot of these same people who push this idea, they'll actually suggest that reincarnation is the only way that we can get out of that existence if we want to come back to enjoy, quote, physical sensation and things like that. So, so you mean that, you know, so basically like the main point being is that this world, rather, you know, existence isn't this duality that's earth-centric, where we live here and then we go over to this one other type of place that's shared by everybody with these very specific, very narrow, very limited conditions. And then if we want to experience anything other than that, then we have to reincarnate and come back here. This is an inaccurate way of looking at things that has been influenced, I think, mostly by the intense theological influence in Western culture. In reality, we're looking at a multiverse where anything is possible. All things that you could possibly imagine are out there, are happening right now as we speak, in realms that the only way we could possibly imagine it is to consider that anything that you could possibly think of is out there happening right now. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because it's so vast that we can't even possibly begin to imagine it. Things like I do, like astral projection, is just exploring the tiniest fraction of the multiverse. So anybody who tries to tell me that basic concepts are impossible, these are people who are plugged into an outdated way of thinking, of looking at this subject in a very, very narrow way. So don't let them bamboozle you. It's my advice. This is Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. You can get involved, afterlifetopics.com. If you want to support my work, check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Afterlife Topics. Helps keep this whole thing going. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on the next video.